moving on. Our main story tonight concerns water. It is not just the one thing that your houseplant needed that you couldn't even provide. It's also the engine that once powered this classic toy.
What's this crazy thing? Why, it's the Whammo Water Wiggle. You've never seen anything like it. Just hook up to a hose and look, a new fun game. It's practically alive. You never know what the Water Wiggle will do next.
Yes, the Water Wiggle. You'll never know what it'll do next, except kill some people, because that's what the Water Wiggle did. It killed multiple people, and it was recalled. That's right, we are less than 2 minutes into this piece, and I've already hit you with a trademark John Oliver sad fact. Sad fact! Now, water is obviously vital to all life on Earth. Our bodies are essentially bags of bones and meat suspended in water, but already 3.6 billion people, nearly half the world's population, live in areas that suffer water scarcity at least 1 month each year. And while this is clearly becoming a problem everywhere, tonight we're going to focus on the American West, where the last several decades have seen a record-breaking drought. The Southwest is actually going through its driest 22-year period since 800 AD. That is as far back as the data goes, which is already pretty startling, partly because I cannot believe that someone back then was even keeping drought records. It was probably the 9th century version of me, some lanky, nearsighted dweeb who squealed, "I'll be the official drought daddy. I'll count the wets." And this drought has had massive impact on the Colorado River in particular, which is a key source of water for most of the southwestern states.
22 years of drought combined with exploding populations in Colorado and throughout the Southwest have led to record low levels at both Lake Powell in Utah and Lake Mead outside Las Vegas, where an expanding white ring of mineral deposits is probably the most visual evidence of the river's decline.
It's dire. The situation along the Colorado River is dire, and I'm not sure it's going to get better ever.
Wow. That is a bleak thing to hear an environmental expert say, but then the news here is bleak. Water levels in Lake Mead have now fallen so much that you may have seen authorities have found human remains there twice in just 1 week, which really freaked me out until I remembered that I dumped that hitchhiker in Lake Mojave, not Lake Mead, so I'm good. And while you would like to think a situation this dire would cause people to be more mindful of our water usage, instead, we're seeing stories like this.
Right now, it's an empty plot of land covered with brush, but if developer Regent Properties gets the go-ahead, the open desert will be transformed into this, the $750 million Thermal Beach Club. Under the current plan, the developer wants to build 326 luxury homes here at the site, all surrounding a 20-acre surfing lagoon.
That's right, a 20-acre surfing lagoon in the middle of the California desert. One of at least 4 new surf lagoons proposed out there. That is just monumentally stupid. I'm honestly surprised they didn't go even further. Not only do we have surfing lagoons, we also have a wall of constantly flushing toilets, a hose that runs all day in the middle of a concrete parking lot, and of course, Wet Frank, a man that we pay to dump buckets of water on himself all day. Keep it up, Frank. We stan a damp legend. And while development like that is obviously not ideal, it is depressingly consistent with our approach to water out west, because it has been a history of denial and wishful thinking, especially around the Colorado River, that is now crashing into harsh reality. So tonight, let's take a look at our water shortage, how it's been impacted by the choices that we've made, and what we can do about it. And let's start with how the Colorado River is managed, because a lot of the problems that we're seeing today can be traced back to decisions that were made a century ago.
This precious resource is allocated based on a 1922 agreement called the Colorado River Compact. Once the river basin states agreed on their fair shares, they each established a seniority system. First in time, first in right.
It's true, 7 states got together and carved up all the water in the river, essentially letting people lay claim to it through a complex system of calling dibs. And look, I've got no problem with dibs in principle. It's a great way to figure out who gets the last slice of pizza, or the pink starbursts, or the cutest baby at the hospital. I don't care if he gave birth to her, I call dibs, that one is mine. But it is a weird way to divide up something as important as water. The Colorado River Compact serves as the foundation for what is known as the Law of the River, which sounds less like a set of water management agreements and more like an animated buddy cop movie starring a trout and a bear voiced by 2 actors who are both wildly anti-Semitic. But there were a few major problems with how the compact was set up right from the start. First, Mexico wasn't included, and even though it is today, the river essentially runs dry by the time it gets across the border. And the compact also didn't specifically address the water needs of the more than 24 Native American tribes who depend on the river, which is pretty shitty, especially as those tribes do have the most senior water rights, given that they were, in a very real sense, here first. They have the ultimate dibs. But even so, tribes have had to struggle to get those water rights actually quantified on paper, and even then, to get the infrastructure they need in order to access it. And for many tribes, those fights are still happening. But it wasn't just about who the compact left out. Another key flaw was that right from the start, it allocated more water than actually existed. Water supplies are measured in acre-feet, and the compact divided up rights to 15 million acre-feet of water, even though the river only carries around 12 to 13 million. And to be clear, they knew this was a problem at the time. The explorer and scientist John Wesley Powell warned in 1893 there is not sufficient water to supply these lands. But the bullshit math never stopped. Just 10 years ago, in a major study by the federal government, states forced the modelers to add so-called magic water, extra water that existed in the computer model only, which is just absurd. And not only because magic water sounds like a euphemism for urine used exclusively by Bjork. It's me, Bjork. Sometimes I have to make some magic water, hee. But it takes forever to get out of this swan. And I do get why states might want to pretend there is more water than there is, because they want continued growth and economic development, and nobody wants to be the bad guy pointing out the fundamental problem with that. Just listen to a reporter pressing a representative of Southern Nevada's water authority on how they can justify growth in the face of looming water scarcity.
But something's got to give. I mean, you can't just keep expanding the population size with a dwindling water supply. I mean, that's just not sustainable.
That's just human nature. I mean, that really kind of goes back to manifest destiny. It goes back to sort of this American dream. You're going to continue to see people moving to the desert Southwest. So from our perspective as water managers, it is up to us to make sure that we're able to meet the demands of our community, regardless of what our numbers might be.
Okay, so there is a lot there, including the phrase manifest destiny, which, as we all know, only has good connotations. You know, like a self-published book about my struggle, or I really want to impress Jodie Foster, or hello, my name is Ted Cruz. No red flags there at all. But again, you can understand why he feels the need to respond that way. Nobody wants to be the one having to deliver bad news. But the immovable fact is, cities in the desert can't grow without limits, and hard sacrifices will have to be made. Which brings us to another fundamental tension here, specifically between farmers and cities. Because farmers and ranchers were out west much earlier than most American cities were established, meaning they have senior water rights, and they use them. Agriculture uses about 70% of the Colorado River water. And look, obviously, agriculture needs water, and no one wants a situation where we create food shortages, but it is worth knowing in some places, farmers are incentivized to use their allocation to a truly nonsensical degree. Many states along the river have rules promising to confiscate water rights if water users don't maximize their use. Basically, use it or lose it. And that has ingrained certain habits. Just listen to this farmer in Arizona explaining why he chose to grow a particularly water-intensive crop.
Well, I just been farming it, this alfalfa. You got to keep farming it to keep the water, and that's why I was mainly doing it, was to hang on to the water.
Okay, first, I don't know who was filming him there, but that camera is simply too close. Back up and give that man some space. That's just too much face. But second, he farmed alfalfa just so he could hold onto his water rights, which feels ridiculous. The only more absurd way he could have used that water in that field is if he'd also planted Wet Frank. Great work, Frank. The soggy prince did it again. So for all those reasons, many related to the compact's original over-allocation, the Colorado River is shrinking. But what that is leading to now is water users increasingly turning to another major water source, groundwater. Now, groundwater is exactly what it sounds like. Water under the ground. It slowly collects in aquifers beneath the Earth's surface, accumulating when rain, snowmelt, and other natural water sources seep into the ground. But importantly, some of these aquifers took thousands, if not millions, of years to fill. So if we pump them dry, they're not coming back anytime soon. But that's not always reflected in our policies. Take Arizona, for instance. In 80% of the state, there are no laws protecting how much water is taken from the ground. And when you have no limits, it is unsurprisingly a free-for-all.
Over the past 5 years, farmlands have increased by almost a third in Arizona. The number of wells has risen from 43 to 123 in Wilcox alone. All they have to do is buy the land to have access to as much free water as they want.
In this area, there's no rules.
So your client can pump as much water as
they could drill a well every 10 foot all around this place, no limit.
Yeah, that's not great, is it? Partly because drilling that many wells means they're going to pump a ton of groundwater out, and also because if your dog is trying to tell you that Timmy is stuck down a well, which well, Rusty? There are hundreds of them. Which fucking well? You have to give me more than arf here. Where's the boy? And it is not just Arizona. Big farming operations have long been pumping groundwater in the San Joaquin Valley in California, and it has had some pretty severe consequences.
When this much water is pumped out of the aquifer below ground, the clay between the pockets of water collapses, and the ground starts to deflate like a leaky air mattress. The sinking is buckling the walls of irrigation canals, damaging pipes, creating giant sinkholes, and cracking homes. This bridge has dropped so much, the water will soon flow over it instead of under it.
Yeah, it's true, and this is not a new problem. A scientist in California once marked just how much the land had sunk from 1925 to 1977 on a telephone pole, and that is a startling drop. Although if you didn't know what that was measuring, you would be pretty confused. It looks like someone was measuring the shrinking height of an elderly giant with osteoporosis. But in recent years, as large farming operations have drilled deeper and sucked up more water, there have been escalating impacts for the shallower wells that families use. Last year in California, nearly 1,000 shallow household wells went dry, and for anyone who has ever lost one, it can be a real burden.
This is where we catch our water so we can flush toilets. Get up in the morning, take 2 bottles of rainwater, put it in a coffee pot. My fiance will come in, she'll help me wash my hands, and then we'll take this water, recycle it, put it in a bucket out there until it gets enough till we can flush the toilet.
What about showering?
Well, usually we have to go into town to one of my friend's house, and if I can't go to my friend's house, you'll see some guys, there's ads even on Craigslist to be able to take a shower, $5 take a shower, that kind of stuff. That's what kind of place it is around here.
Wow. Using Craigslist to take a shower, that is legitimately horrifying. How do you even write an ad for that without it sounding suspicious? Seeking shower for $5. 34-year-old adult non-creep looking for fellow non-creepy adult to allow me to use their shower. This is not a euphemism. There's a water shortage and I genuinely just want to get washed. Again, not a euphemism. This isn't sexual in any way. I will happily pay $5 American for the shower. You can't watch, you can't tape it, you can't be weird. I'm just going to come into your house, hand you a $5 bill, get in the shower, wash my hair and body as quickly as possible and then leave, all while making the least amount of eye contact possible. We won't talk or have any conversation. Ideally, you'll forget this whole thing ever happened. Actually, you know what? I don't like the way any of this is sounding, so I'm just going to stay dirty forever. Please do not contact me with unsolicited services or offers. And perhaps the most important thing to know about groundwater is that it's not totally independent of surface water at all. These are often part of one intertwined hydrological system, so when you pump groundwater, it can ultimately dry up rivers. The connection between groundwater and surface water is one of those alarming connections that we just choose to forget. You know, like the one between Elizabeth Moss and Scientology. It's so much easier just not to really think about it. So, to recap, for decades now, we've been using more water than the Colorado River has, even as we have rapidly depleted critical groundwater supplies. And when it comes to responding to this crisis, places have gone in very different directions. One of the best actors, and you are not going to believe this, is actually Las Vegas, which I know automatically feels weird because when you think of Vegas, you probably think of it as a place that uses water for things like this.
How you doing?
So, what are we looking at? There's just the lovely waterfalls and the trickling fountain.
Appreciate their uniqueness.
I mean, honestly, I feel genuinely bad for that fountain. No drop of water ever dreamed of one day being forced to dance to the Friends theme for a bunch of drunk Vegas tourists. No one told them life was gonna be this way. But the thing is, despite looking extremely wasteful, the Bellagio's fountain actually isn't. It uses water that's too salty to drink and annually only uses as much water as would irrigate just 8 acres of alfalfa. And that is just one tiny way that the people of Vegas have learned to conserve water. They've also banned new lawns and ornamental grass there, which should save about 10 billion gallons a year. And overall, even though the population of the Vegas metro area grew by 34% between 2002 and 2013, its use of Colorado River water actually dropped by over a quarter. So Vegas could actually be something of a model for other places when it comes to water conservation and literally nothing else. But unfortunately, not everywhere is taking it that seriously, with the worst example being Utah, home of both the Utah Jazz and their mascot, Jazz Bear, who answers the question, what if Wile E. Coyote was a jock who also wanted to murder me in my sleep? Crush me, king. Utah's residents use the most water of any Western state, and nowhere is this more true than St. George, which has become one of the fastest growing metro areas in the country, with per person water consumption among the highest. Not only does St. George have very cheap water rates, their county, which is in the desert, remember, has at least a dozen golf courses, including these. And golf courses use a shit ton of water. They are pretty much the dumbest possible thing to put into the middle of the desert, other than, of course, Burning Man. And while Utah has recently passed some new laws encouraging conservation, they've also been pursuing a $1 billion pipeline to bring in what some in Utah insist is additional surplus water from Lake Powell, a surplus that anyone who so much as looks at that lake would know simply does not exist. And I know that seems wildly irresponsible on Utah's part, and that is because it is. Though, to be fair, it is still not the worst idea they've had, because just watch this video from the governor of Utah in response to drought conditions there just last year.
We need more rain, and we need it now. We need some divine intervention. That's why I'm asking Utahns of all faiths to join me in a weekend of prayer, June 4th through the 6th. By praying collaboratively and collectively, asking God or whatever higher power you believe in for more rain, we may be able to escape the deadliest aspects of the continuing drought.
Wow. You know Utah is desperate when they ask all faiths to join in a prayer. I'm asking Utahns of all faiths, whether that's the Mormon one or one of the many wrong ones, to collectively pray to the Christian God and the false deities the rest of you worship for more rain so that we can solve this crisis before those of you who have not accepted Jesus Christ into your heart burn in the fires of eternal hell. So, what can we do about all of this? Well, we can start by acknowledging some uncomfortable truths. First, states like Utah are not going to be able to use the full amount of water that they think they're entitled to, primarily because that full amount never actually existed in the first place. But it is not just Utah. No state can continue using water the way they've gotten used to. Experts suggest it might help actually not to use the word drought at all anymore, which sounds temporary, and instead use the term aridification as a better way to describe what might be a long-term drying of the American West. So we need to be incentivizing conservation and water efficiency, especially when it comes to agriculture, and stop with our magical thinking toward water, which has been depressingly common throughout history. During a drought in the 90s, city officials in Ventura, California, decided to study the possibility of hauling icebergs from the polar caps and planting them off the county's shores. One proponent even suggested we'd have to wrap the iceberg with a diaper to collect the melting iceberg water. More recently, Arizona passed a resolution to study building a pipeline from the Mississippi River to the Colorado River. And if you've ever seen a map of the United States, you may have noticed that the Mississippi River is all the way over here, and Arizona is all the way over here. So to do that, you need a pipeline that's over 1,000 miles long. And the only way that idea could get any dumber is if the pipeline was also somehow wrapped in a diaper. Don't worry, everyone. Chase is on the case. The fact is, states need to start working together to cut back on their collective water use, and some have tried small steps. In Arizona, home, remember, to our close-up alfalfa farmer, they recently changed their use it or lose it rules to allow for more conservation. And in California, in 2014, they passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act to try and bring groundwater pumping under control. But it is just not enough. And that may well be why something very big happened just a week ago. Because the government dropped a bombshell on the Colorado River states, telling them they have 60 days to create an emergency plan to stop using between 2 and 4 million acre-feet of water in the next year, which is a massive amount. Or the agency will use its emergency authority to make the cuts itself. That is a drastic move, but we are in a drastic situation. So let's hope those states get to work in the next 2 months and come up with a decent plan, because we desperately need to prepare for a much drier future in the American West and do it more equitably this time, because it is imperative that we learn from our past mistakes. And for anyone who still thinks that this is something we can just pray our way out of, I actually have a special message from a very special guest.
Hi, it's me, God. I know I don't often do this, but I just wanted to appear in person to make one thing perfectly clear. You can't pray your way out of a drought. Frankly, I'm insulted you even asked me. You got yourself in this fucking mess. Get yourself the fuck out of it. I gave you plenty of water. It's not my fault you wasted it building surfing lagoons and golf courses in the middle of a fucking desert. Utah. Your capital is Salt Lake City. It's next to a salt lake. A lake of salt? Take the fucking hint. So no, I will not be answering your prayer for rain. For the record, I've only ever answered one prayer. Little Timmy Pendleton wanted a Hess truck for his birthday in 1986. And I made sure he got one. The kid just really seemed to want that truck, and you know, maybe I felt bad about killing both his parents with that tornado. I don't know. There's so many things I'd rather talk about to you than your stupid water usage. Like the meaning of life, or which animal I created by mistake. Guinea pigs, by the way. The point is, I want humans of all faiths to come together and act like rational fucking adults when it comes to water use. Heed my words, my children, and conserve the once bountiful gifts of rivers and lakes which I created for you on earth. Now, fuck off.